There are all sorts of discrimination in the world today, and we recognise them with words like racist, sexist, those kind of things which we rightly point out as being unacceptable and not part of a civilised society. And yet today we're now encountering an even more formidable and more widespread form of discrimination. Those who have been vaccinated seem to want to discriminate against the unvaccinated. I think that deserves a term in its own right. I think I'll call that Vaxist. Racist is a well-known term, and it's been used to show discrimination against people on the basis purely of the colour of their skin. Vaxist, well, that shows discrimination on the basis of their vaccine status, to divide humanity into two groups, so that you can treat one group worse than the other group. Yes, it's still a form of discrimination, and it's based upon maybe belief in this case, or understanding, or infirmity, or for a whole host of different reasons why people don't get vaccinated. Sometimes health reasons, sometimes conscience reasons, but it's still discrimination. And I think it deserves a term in its own right. It's for people like Michael Gove, for example, who believe that people who are not vaccinated are stupid. Or people like de Blasio, the mayor of New York, who believes that those people who are not vaccinated ought to have fewer and fewer rights and fewer entitlements to a decent life, which just divides human beings into the groups who have and have not, the accepted and the unacceptable, those who are wise and those who are stupid, those who are acceptable and those who are unacceptable, those who are admissible into society and those who must be barred from society. Yes, it's a form of discrimination. And while we're at it, let's add the word vaxphobe too. I think that's a kind of an irrational fear of the unvaccinated. They're like the great unwashed. They're people who, if they walk in the street, they might infect you in some kind of way. And yet it's irrational, and I think I use the word irrational properly here, because who would have the greatest fear of illness, the vaccinated or the unvaccinated? Those who've been protected from an illness, or those who don't seem to have that protection from a vaccination? Who should be in fear of the other one most? Should the vaccinated, who have the protection, be in fear of those who are not vaccinated, who don't have the protection? That's why I mean it's irrational. And so an irrational hatred, an irrational fear, yes, it deserves the term vaxphobe. Already we're finding that the language that's being used against the unvaccinated is very similar to the language that was used against Jewish people in the 1930s. Take one quotation from La Repubblica, one of the major national newspapers in Italy, which ran a headline that says, "Now is the time to hunt down the unvaccinated." Another virologist in Italy, and appears regularly on television, has referred to the unvaccinated as rats, who will be obliged to close themselves into their own holes. That's typical of the language which was used against the Jews in the 30s. It's now being used against the unvaccinated in the 20s. And even the church is not immune from this kind of activity. The church in San Paolo, near Turin, zealous priests have hung up a billboard which says, "Unvaccinated people are not welcome." I can see very little difference between the way in which you treat the unvaccinated today and the way in which they treated the Jews in 1930s Germany. Yes, don't allow them a job, and don't allow them to go around the streets normally, and corral them at home first, and then put them into ghettos later on. Maybe that's coming around the corner for the unvaccinated. It's all Vaxist, in the same way as something might have been anti-Semitic in the old days. We've just got a different group of people, but we're treating them in the same kind of way. And it seems that we've learned very little from the entire process of going through World War II and going through all the pain and the distress and the sheer hell of confining people into camps and putting them away from society and not letting them take a full part in the world. I thought we'd learned our lesson on that, but clearly we haven't.